team speaking about marijuana harms. I'd like to introduce the team speaking for marijuana benefits, and the first one is Dr. Gavin Cape. No, he's already done. Dr. Geoff Noller, an independent researcher.
Okay, good Hunter. Thank you very much for the opportunity to give it a go. There's a hum over there. Maybe I'll just, is that better if I just speak a bit louder? Can people hear me this way? Okay, well, I find myself in agreement with our friends who've just spoken on a number of issues. And for me, it's more a case of thinking, yes, there are certainly issues associated with the use of cannabis. How are we going to deal with them? Okay, well, I'd just like to talk very briefly about some research that I carried out for my PhD, finished a couple of years ago. I interviewed 80 cannabis users in Dunedin, and the idea was to examine normative use. So it's getting away from this idea of only looking at the negative consequences of use and the pathology of use, with cannabis users typically pathologised in how we describe them. It was interesting to hear Matthew's conversation, and he described a whole series of effects of cannabis, but you'd be forgiven for thinking, well, why would people use it? Because he mentioned all these sort of negative effects, but why do people keep using it? And the answer is, I think, that there are also pleasures and advantages that people experience when they use cannabis. This is the advertisement that I put in the Canadian newspaper to my participants. So I wasn't just talking to a bunch of my friends. The idea, generally, this group of people were comparative with the Dunedin population. The two major skews were in terms of gender, with more males than females, which is typical of a cannabis-using population. So you might say that the people that I spoke with were representative of the cannabis-using population. A quarter of them had some arrest or conviction around cannabis. So it's not other criminal offences, just cannabis offences. And so you'd have to say, well, maybe this motivated them to be involved in the study. And so you need to think about that when you're thinking about the kinds of answers they gave, that maybe they had some things they wanted to talk about. This image here is my attempt to summarise my PhD in one diagram. So I'm quite proud of that, actually. But what I'd like to show you here, you'll notice that the words have numbers next to them. And these are the rank order of the issues and themes. These are all themes that were identified by the 80 cannabis users, which related to the particular issues that they felt when I spoke to them. They drew out of those, well, I drew out of their conversations. You'll notice the number one thing was a big cluster of things under benefits. So they had a range of benefits that they saw accruing from their use. Interestingly enough, however, harms, if we can get over the thing happening here again, is the second most significant area that they thought about. And so they were aware of the harms as well. And I think it's very important to understand that people aren't just using cannabis open slather, they are aware of these other issues. Just very briefly, I want to look at a couple of these issues, or benefits that were identified there, and I particularly want to draw your attention to this one up here, control, which is also a meta-theme, in other words, a theme that was of broader significance to the whole analysis. This notion of control is very significant. This person here, the youngest member of the study, 18 years of age, and she's talking about alcohol. It's interesting with Gavin drawing that out, that alcohol is considered a very dangerous drug. The people in the study felt the same, and as I'll let you guys read that as I'm speaking. And her sense was that she felt out of control when she used alcohol. And she felt, by comparison, if she used cannabis, then she maintained, even though she was having an experience, a drug experience, she was holding her consciousness, which I would argue is something almost intrinsic to the human condition, she was having an experience that she felt she had control of. And so I would suggest that is an advantage that she felt using cannabis conferred. And I think we're all very familiar with the kinds of issues that people have in relation to alcohol and how it can be a very dangerous substance for a lot of reasons. Again, I'll read this one through with you. This relates to stress relief, and it also leads on to my friend Simon, who's going to speak next about some of his experiences. And this is kind of a medicinal thing. I find marijuana hugely effective. And that's partly why I find it useful actually in my work, in a way, because I have really stressful moments. Now, I want to emphasise that he was not using at work. The most prominent group in this study were teachers, the second most, medical professionals, the second most prominent professional group using were teachers, okay? So he says, I think it allows me not only to not focus narrowly on a problem. If I have an incident where maybe it's on my mind, it allows me to think of the severity of it, how important it is for me really to carry on worrying about it. It allows me to think about it in terms of my other work and about life in general. So he's saying that it allows him a sense of gaining perspective, and so again, this is another advantage that I would suggest, along with many others, that cannabis confers. I can see that we've only got 30 seconds.
30 seconds?
Yeah, I know, it snuck up on us, didn't it? I'll talk faster, I'm always accused of doing that. So I just want you to look at this last idea, the notion of cannabis use as a cultural practice. I actually agree with a lot of what you guys have said in terms of the harms associated with cannabis. Some of the research I won't comment on because I don't have the specifics of it. I do have some concerns about the great brain robbery of Julian. There are some very significant inaccuracies in that book, but perhaps that's something that you and I can talk about later on, and I think there's other stuff that could be looked at instead. But I think there are problems. I think we need to think about those, but most importantly, I think we need to think about how we're going to approach it, about getting good policy that works and has positive results and reduces harm. Thank you.
Just very quickly, can I quickly reply to that comment?
Certainly.
There are great cartoons in this book.
The concern, just right of reply, the concern that I have in particular is that there's one statistic, for example, that cannabis is 50 times stronger than it used to be, sort of thing. Well, cannabis, they suggest, they don't know, no one ever kept the records, was probably around 2% THC, 25, 30 years ago. That would make it 100% THC now, which is a complete nonsense.
Same here.
So I think we do need to, I hear what you're saying, but I think we do need to be careful about the type of research that we put forward and how people respond to it. Thank you.
I'm not amused by comic strips.